They looked at his hoodie and saw a thug. They looked at his skin and saw a threat. But they didn't look at the name on the manifest until it was too late. When the head stewardess of Royal Horizon Airlines sneered, "This cabin is for the elite, not for people like you." She didn't realize she was talking to the man who owned the debt on the very plane she was standing in. One denied seat, one humiliated passenger, and one phone call that didn't just ground a flight, it froze an entire fleet, locked $2 billion in assets, and turned a busy airport into a graveyard of careers. You think you know power? Wait until you see Peter Sterling silence a room without raising his voice. The air inside JFK's Terminal 4 was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and the frenetic energy of the holiday rush. But inside the exclusive Diamond Sky first-class lounge, the noise was dampened to a respectful hush, or at least it was supposed to be. Peter Sterling stood at the reception desk, his posture relaxed, though his patience was thinning by the second. He wasn't dressed like the other patrons. While men around him adjusted their bespoke Brioni suits and women clutched Hermes Birkins, Peter wore a charcoal grey hoodie, black joggers, and a pair of worn-in Nike Dunks. He looked like a tech intern on a coffee run, not the majority shareholder of Sterling Vanguard Holdings, a private equity firm that quietly managed infrastructure for 3 of the world's largest airlines. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one last time to step aside," the lounge receptionist said. Her name tag read Jessica, and her smile was as synthetic as the airport lighting. She didn't look at his boarding pass. She was looking at the man behind him, a tall, silver-haired man in a navy suit who looked like a senator. "I have a ticket," Peter said, his voice a low, calm baritone. He tapped the black titanium card on the counter. "Seat 1A, flight RH882 to London Heathrow." Jessica let out a short, sharp sigh, barely masking her irritation. "Sir, Seat 1A is a first-class suite. This line is for priority members. Economy and Economy Plus check-in is downstairs near Gate B12. "I know where Economy is," Peter said, sliding his phone forward to show the QR code. "And I know where I'm sitting. Scan the code." Jessica didn't scan it. She glanced at the security guard standing near the frosted glass doors. "We have a dress code in the Diamond Lounge, sir. Even if you did manage to upgrade with miles, we reserve the right to deny entry to anyone who disturbs the atmosphere of our elite clientele." The man behind Peter cleared his throat. "Come on, son. You're holding up the line. Some of us have meetings in London." Peter turned slowly. The man in the suit smirked, checking his Rolex. It was a Submariner. Nice watch. Peter owned the company that insured the shipping crates those watches came in. "I'm not holding up the line," Peter said to the man, then turned back to Jessica. "She is. Scan the pass." Jessica's eyes narrowed. She finally snatched the phone from the counter, her movements jerky and aggressive. She held the scanner like a weapon, aiming it at the screen with a look of pure skepticism. Beep! The screen on her console flashed green. "Passenger. Sterling, M status, invitation only." "Seat 1A." The color drained from her face for a split second, but then a new emotion took over. Confusion. Then suspicion. She looked at the screen, then back at Peter's hoodie. This must be a system error," she muttered. She typed furiously. "There is no way. This status key. Invitation only is reserved for board members and Royal Horizon partners." "Is there a problem?" Peter asked. "The problem," a new voice cut in, "is that you are clearly using a fraudulent pass." Peter looked up. Walking out from the inner office was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that built arrogance. He was tall, thin, with slicked-back hair and a badge that read Julian Thorne, Senior Station Manager. Julian looked Peter up and down, his lip curling in distaste. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a problem. He saw someone who didn't belong in his pristine, polished kingdom. "Mr. Thorne," Jessica stammered, "the system says he's invitation only, but—" "I see it," Julian interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. He walked right up to Peter, invading his personal space. "We've been having issues with hackers selling stolen mileage accounts on the dark web. It's a clever trick, kid. But you picked the wrong airport and the wrong manager." Peter didn't flinch. "I bought this ticket 3 hours ago. Direct transfer. No miles, no hacks." "Security," Julian barked, not even listening. The guard stepped forward, hand hovering near his belt. "Sir," the guard grunted. "You need to leave." Peter looked at Julian. "You really want to do this? You haven't even checked the manifest properly. If you kick me out, you're going to regret it." Julian laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "The only thing I regret is that our security screening let someone like you wander this far up. Get out, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing and fraud." The man in the suit behind Peter chuckled. "Go back to coach, kid. Maybe they'll give you extra peanuts." Peter stared at Julian for 3 long seconds. He was memorizing the face, memorizing the name. Julian Thorne. "Okay," Peter said softly. He took his phone back. "I'll leave the lounge, but I'm getting on that plane." "We'll see about that," Julian sneered. "I'm flagging your ticket for review at the gate. If you're lucky, you might make the standby list for the middle seat in the back row. Now move." Peter turned and walked away. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply walked out of the lounge, pulling his phone from his pocket. He dialed a number saved as Elena, Chief Legal. "Peter?" The voice on the other end answered instantly. "Elena, pull the contract for Royal Horizon Airlines, specifically the leasing agreement for their transatlantic fleet. The 7 LMA-7s? We own the debt on those." "Why?" "I want to know the exact terms of default, and I want to know who the shift director for JFK operations is." "Peter, what's going on?" "I'm about to conduct a surprise inspection," Peter said, his voice ice-cold, "and I have a feeling they're going to fail." The walk to gate B12 was long, but Peter used every step to calibrate his anger. He wasn't a man who acted on impulse. He was a predator who waited for the wind to change. When he arrived at the gate, the boarding process was already chaotic. The gate agents were overwhelmed, and the line for economy stretched down the hallway. Peter bypassed the crowd and walked toward the priority lane. "Ticket," the gate agent snapped. She didn't look up. Peter scanned his phone. The machine flashed red. "Action required." "Step aside," the agent said, pointing to a roped-off area where 3 other confused passengers were standing. "There's an issue with your payment." "There's no issue," Peter said. "Sir, the system has flagged you for fraud review. Step aside." Peter looked toward the jet bridge. Standing there, holding a clipboard and looking incredibly pleased with himself, was Julian Thorne. He had come down from the lounge personally. He wanted to watch. Julian caught Peter's eye and smirked, mouthing the words, "I told you." Peter stepped under the rope, ignoring the agent's command, and walked straight toward Julian. 2 police officers who were chatting nearby straightened up, sensing the tension. "You flagged the ticket," Peter said, stopping 5 feet from Julian. "I flagged a security risk," Julian corrected, his voice loud enough for the first-class passengers boarding nearby to hear. "We take fraud very seriously at Royal Horizon, and frankly, your presence makes our premium passengers uncomfortable." "My presence?" Peter repeated. "Or my skin color?" The terminal went quiet. The air grew heavy. Julian's face tightened. "Don't play the victim card with me. You're a scammer. I've seen a dozen guys like you. Flashy sneakers, no luggage, trying to sneak into a life you didn't earn. You're not getting on my plane." In fact, you're not flying Royal Horizon at all. I've placed you on the internal no-fly list, pending an investigation." He turned to the police officers. "Officers, this man is refusing to follow airline instructions. Please escort him out of the secure area." One of the officers, a burly sergeant named Miller, stepped forward. "All right, buddy, let's go. Don't make this hard." Peter held up a hand. "I have the right to speak to a representative of the airline's Corporate Oversight Committee before being removed." "I am the oversight," Julian spat. "I run this terminal. What I say goes. And I say you're trash." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Peter nodded slowly. He didn't look at the cops. He looked at his watch. 4:15 p.m. The markets in London were closed, but New York was still wide open. "Trash," Peter repeated. "Okay." He reached into his hoodie pocket. Officer Miller put a hand on his holster. "Hands where I can see them." "Just getting my phone," Peter said calmly. He pulled out the device. It wasn't the iPhone he had used earlier. This was a satellite phone, a heavy black brick of a device with no camera and encrypted military-grade casing. Julian laughed. "Who are you calling? Your mum?" "No," Peter said, pressing a single speed dial button. "I'm calling the owner of this plane." "The owner?" Julian scoffed. "Royal Horizon owns this plane, you idiot." "Actually," Peter said into the receiver, his eyes locking onto Julian's, "Royal Horizon leases this plane. Specifically, a Boeing 737-300ER, tail number NARH. They lease it from a shell company called Apex Aviation." "So?" Julian sneered. "And Apex Aviation," Peter continued, speaking clearly into the phone, "is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Vanguard Holdings." Julian froze. The name sounded familiar. He had seen it on the bottom of the paychecks. He had seen it on the annual report covers in the break room. "Elena," Peter said into the phone, "execute Clause 14B of the Master Lease Agreement. Immediate repossession due to breach of operational standards." "Peter!" Elena's voice crackled, loud enough for Julian to hear. "Are you sure? Clause 14B allows us to ground the asset immediately. It will strand 300 passengers." "Do it," Peter said. "And not just this one. Ground every aircraft leased under the 2024 tranche. That's, 151 aircraft currently in service across North America and Europe?" 151, Elena confirmed. "I'm sending the cease and desist to the FAA and Eurocontrol now." Peter hung up. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian stared at him, his mouth slightly open. You're bluffing. Who are you?" Peter took a step forward. The hoodie didn't look like thug wear anymore. It looked like the robes of an executioner. "My name," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet gate area, "is Peter Sterling, CEO of Sterling Vanguard. I own your fleet. I own your debt. And as of 30 seconds ago, I own your career." The reaction wasn't instantaneous. It rippled. First, the gate agent's computer made a strange sound, a low, discordant bong. Then, the screen above the gate, which had been displaying boarding, flickered and went black. A moment later, it flashed red. "Flight cancelled." A murmur went through the crowd. Then Julian's radio exploded with noise. "Tower to gate B12. What is going on down there? We just got a lockout code on the flight computer." "Operations to Thorn. Julian, we're losing telemetry on the entire 777 fleet. The pilot of Flight 882 says his avionics just locked him out. He can't start the engines. He says there's a message on the flight management system." Julian grabbed his radio, his hands trembling. "What message? What does it say?" The voice on the radio sounded terrified. It says, "Asset repossessed. Contact lessor, M. Sterling." Julian dropped the radio. It clattered to the floor, the plastic cracking. Around them, Phones started ringing. Not just one or two, but dozens. Passengers were getting notifications. The pilots inside the cockpit of the plane, visible through the window, were frantically waving their hands, pointing at their dark screens. But it wasn't just this flight. Across the terminal, screens were flipping from on time to cancelled, like dominoes falling. New York to Paris, cancelled. New York to Dubai, cancelled. New York to Tokyo, cancelled. In the distance, a collective groan of thousands of stranded passengers rose up like a wave crashing against the shore. Peter stood amidst the chaos, a calm island in a storm of his own making. He looked at the police officer, Miller, who had taken his hand off his gun and was looking at Peter with wide, bewildered eyes. "Officer," Peter said politely, "I believe I'm the victim of a business dispute. I'd like to file a report." Julian stumbled back, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. You can't do this. You can't just turn off the planes." "I didn't turn them off," Peter said. "I revoked your license to use my software. It's in the contract, Julian. Failure to treat representatives of the lessor with professional conduct. It's a standard clause, usually ignored. But today I felt like enforcing it." "You stopped 151 flights?" Julian whispered. "Do you have any idea how much money that is?" "Rough estimate?" Peter tilted his head. "Average revenue per flight is 300,000, multiplied by 151, plus the penalties, the hotel vouchers, the reputation damage. I'd say I just cost Royal Horizon about $2 billion, give or take." Julian looked like he was going to vomit. "Mr. Thorne." A woman came running down the jet bridge. It was the flight captain. She was furious. "Who is Monsieur Sterling? My bird is dead. The entire system is bricked. I have 300 people on board, and no AC, no lights, nothing." Julian pointed a shaking finger at Peter. The captain turned to Peter. She was a veteran, tough as nails, but she looked confused. "You? The guy in the hoodie?" "Captain," Peter nodded respectfully. "I apologize for the inconvenience. Your aircraft is currently legally stolen property, as Mr. Thorne here refused to acknowledge the owner. As soon as the legal dispute is settled, you'll be back in the air." "Settled?" Julian shrieked. "You maniac! You can't just hold us hostage." "I'm not holding you hostage," Peter said. "I'm waiting for someone who actually matters to show up." He walked over to the nearest row of seats, where a stunned family was watching. He sat down, crossed his legs, and pulled out a small bag of trail mix from his pocket. "I've got time," Peter said, popping an almond into his mouth. "Let's see how long it takes for your CEO to call me." As if on cue, the public address system chimed. But it wasn't a normal announcement. "Attention all personnel. Attention all personnel. Priority 1 alert. All station managers report to the operations center immediately. Repeat, all managers to ops. Total system failure in progress." Julian's phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was the CEO of Royal Horizon, David Gower. Julian looked at Peter. Peter smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. "Answer it, Julian," Peter said. "Tell him why his stock price just dropped 12% in 5 minutes. Tell him it was because you didn't like my hoodie." The chaos at Gate B12 had metastasized. It wasn't just a delayed flight anymore. It was a contagion. The news had broken. CNN was already running a chyron. "Cyber attack, 150-plus flights grounded globally." Twitter was trending. Royal Horizon down, but inside the terminal, the eye of the storm was silent. Julian Thorne held his phone out like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. He wants to speak to you," Julian stammered, his face the color of old ash. Peter didn't reach for the phone. He didn't even look up from his trail mix. "Put it on speaker." Julian's hand shook as he tapped the icon. Thorn. The voice blared from the tiny speaker, distorted by rage. It was David Gower, the CEO of Royal Horizon. I don't care what kind of glitch this is. I have the Secretary of Transportation on the other line, asking why American airspace is paralyzed. Get those planes in the air, or I will personally come down there and dismantle you. Mr. Gower, Julian squeaked. It's not a glitch. It's a repossession. The lessor activated a kill switch. Lessor? What are you talking about? We pay our leases. Mr. Gower, Peter said, his voice cutting through the static. He didn't shout, but the timbre of his voice silenced the CEO instantly. This is Peter Sterling. I believe we met at the Davos summit last year. You spilled champagne on my shoe. You didn't apologize then, either. There was a pause on the line. A long, heavy silence. You could practically hear the gears turning in Gower's head, calls to legal, frantic typing on a keyboard. Sterling? Gower's voice changed. It dropped an octave, feigning familiarity. Peter Sterling of Vanguard. My God, is this you? Look, there must be a misunderstanding. My station manager said there was a security threat. The threat, Peter said, eyeing Julian, was a hoodie. Your manager decided that my attire voided my ticket. He decided that my money wasn't green enough for your first-class lounge. He called me a fraud. He called the police. Julian did what? Gower roared. Julian flinched as if he'd been slapped. I'm a businessman, David, Peter continued, examining a cashew. I respect contracts. Your contract states that the lessee must maintain a standard of professional operational integrity. Today, your airline treated the owner of its fleet like a criminal. That is a breach. I've accepted the breach. The planes are mine again. Peter, please! Gower sounded desperate now. Be reasonable. You can't just ground a billion-dollar operation over a rude employee. We can fix this. I'll fire him. I'll fire Thorn right now. Thorn, you're fired. Get out of my sight. Julian dropped the phone. He looked at Peter, eyes wide with terror. His career was evaporating in real time. That's a start, Peter said, but it's not enough. You see, David, this isn't just about Julian. It's about the culture. You built a brand on exclusion, on making people feel small so you could feel big. Julian was just doing what you taught him. What do you want? Gower asked. Name your price. We can wire a settlement. 10 million? 20? Peter laughed. It was a genuine, amused sound. I don't need your money, David. I have more of it than you do. I want you to come here. Come? There? To JFK? Yes. Gate B12. I want you to look the passengers in the eye, the ones sleeping on the floor because of your policies. And I want you to apologize. To them. And to me. I'm in Chicago, Gower protested. I can't just— You have a Gulfstream G650, Peter interrupted. It's fully fueled at O'Hare. It's one of the few planes I don't own, so it should still fly. You have 2 hours. Every minute you delay, the market cap of Royal Horizon drops another 100 million. The New York Stock Exchange is already halting trading on your ticker. Clock's ticking, Dave. Peter signaled to Officer Miller. Officer, could you hang up the phone for me? Mr. Thorn seems incapable of movement. Miller, who had watched the entire exchange with a look of awe, stepped forward and tapped the end call button. You really shut it all down? Miller asked, looking at the dark departure screens. Sometimes, Peter said, standing up and brushing crumbs from his joggers. You have to turn the machine off to fix the broken parts. He looked at Julian, who was slumped against the podium, weeping silently. Don't go anywhere, Julian, Peter said. The show is just starting. 2 hours later, The atmosphere at JFK Terminal 4 had shifted from chaos to a strange, tense spectacle. The passengers weren't rioting anymore. They were watching. Word had spread. The man in the hoodie wasn't the villain. He was the avenger. People were filming Peter. TikToks were going viral. Dasha hoodie hero versus the CEO. Peter hadn't moved. He sat in the same waiting area, charging his phone. He had bought pizza for the stranded passengers in the immediate area, 50 pies delivered from a local spot. He was eating a slice of pepperoni when the entourage arrived. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. Airport security shoved people aside to make way for a phalanx of suits. In the center walked David Gower. Gower looked nothing like his glossy magazine photos. His tie was crooked. He was sweating through his shirt. He looked like a man who had spent 2 hours screaming at lawyers. Flanking him were 3 corporate attorneys and a very nervous-looking PR director. They marched straight up to Peter. Gower didn't offer a hand. He stopped 3 feet away, breathing hard. "This ends now," Gower hissed. "Unlock the flight computers." Peter finished chewing his bite of pizza. He wiped his hands on a napkin, deliberately slow. "Hello, David. You made good time." "I have an injunction drafted," Gower said, motioning to one of the lawyers who held up a thick stack of papers. "We're filing in federal court, interfering with interstate commerce, extortion. We'll bury you. You can't file an injunction if you don't have a board to authorize it," Peter said calmly. "What?" "While you were in the air," Peter said, "I made a few calls. You see, Royal Horizon's stock price plummeted 40% in the last 2 hours. It was a bloodbath, panic selling." Gower went pale. "I know. We'll recover." "You won't," Peter said, "because I bought the dip." The lawyer dropped the papers. "I've been acquiring leverage in your company for 18 months, Peter explained, standing up to meet Gower's eye level. "I was at 4.9%, just under the reporting threshold. Today, when the stock crashed, I bought another 15%. My partners at Vanguard bought another 10%. As of, let's see," Peter checked his watch, 12 minutes ago, Sterling Vanguard is the majority shareholder of Royal Horizon Airlines. The silence that fell over the group was heavier than the planes sitting on the tarmac. You hostile?" Gower sputtered, unable to finish the sentence. "It wasn't hostile," Peter smiled. "It was a clearance sale. And as the majority shareholder, I am officially calling an emergency board meeting. Right here, right now." Peter turned to the crowd of passengers who were listening in, phones raised. "Motion to dismiss David Gower as CEO for gross incompetence and brand mismanagement," Peter announced to the terminal. "All in favor?" A few passengers chuckled, then one cheered. Then the whole gate erupted. "Aye!" Gower looked around, wild-eyed. "You can't do this! This is a public terminal, not a boardroom!" "I own the planes, David. Now I own the company. I can hold the meeting wherever I want." Peter stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Gower and Julian, who was still lurking nearby, could hear. "You humiliated me," Peter said, the playfulness gone from his eyes. "Not just today, but for years. Companies like yours squeeze every dime out of people, shrink the seats, cut the service, and treat the working class like cattle. You created a culture where a man like Julian thinks he's a god because he has a badge. Well, I'm the lightning bolt." Peter pulled a document from his hoodie pocket. It was a single sheet of paper. "This is a resignation letter," Peter said. "Sign it. If you sign it, you walk away with your severance package and a shred of dignity. If you don't, I keep the fleet grounded for another week. I'll bankrupt the company, strip the assets, and you'll leave with nothing but lawsuits from shareholders that will haunt you until you die." Gower looked at the paper. His hands were trembling so violently he could barely hold the pen Peter offered. "You're a monster," Gower whispered. "I'm a passenger," Peter corrected. "Seat 1A. Gower signed. He scribbled his name, dropped the pen, and turned away, pushing through his own lawyers to escape the gaze of the crowd. Peter watched him go, then turned to the trembling station manager, Julian Thorne. Julian looked like he was praying for the floor to open up and swallow him. "Now," Peter said, turning to the terrified staff. "Let's get these people to London." He tapped his phone. "Elena, release the lock. Reboot the systems." Outside the window, the lights on the Boeing 777 flickered back to life. A roar of applause went up in the terminal. Cheers, whistles, and clapping. But Peter wasn't done. He looked at Julian. "I promised you karma," Peter said, "and I deliver." Julian swallowed hard. I'm fired, I know. I'll leave." "Oh, you're not fired," Peter said. "That would be too easy." Julian blinked. "I'm not?" "No," Peter said. "I own the airlines now, which means I decide who works where, and I have a very specific role in mind for you." The silence that followed David Gower's departure was heavier than the noise of the chaos that had preceded it. The former CEO had not just walked away, he had fled, shielded by his lawyers, leaving a vacuum of power in the middle of Terminal 4. The air in the terminal felt charged, electric. The hundreds of stranded passengers who had spent the last 2 hours in a state of agitation and anger were now silent, their eyes fixed on the man in the charcoal hoodie. They weren't looking at a disruptive passenger anymore. They were looking at the new emperor of the skies. Peter Sterling didn't move immediately. He watched Gower's retreating figure until the automatic door slid shut, cutting off the view of the CEO's escape. Then, slowly, Peter turned his head. He locked eyes with Julian Thorne. Julian was standing by the podium, his knuckles white as he gripped the counter. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck, only to realize he was stranded in open water with sharks. His pristine suit, usually his armor, now looked ill-fitting, dampened with the sweat of absolute terror. He was alone. The police officers had stepped back, sensing the shift in authority. The gate agents were pretending to be busy with paperwork. Peter took a step forward. The sound of his Nike sneakers squeaking on the polished linoleum was the only sound in the gate area. "So," Peter said, his voice low but carrying effortlessly in the quiet hall. "David is gone." Julian swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed violently. He tried to summon the arrogance that had served him so well for 10 years, but the well was dry. He straightened his tie, a reflex of a man trying to look professional while his world collapsed. "Mr. Sterling," Julian began. His voice cracked, and he had to clear his throat. "Mr. Sterling, I want to state for the record that I was acting under direct protocols established by the previous administration. My actions today, while perhaps overzealous, were in line with the security mandates of Royal Horizon." Peter tilted his head, studying Julian like one might study a fascinatingly ugly insect. "Protocols," Peter repeated. "Yes," Julian said, gaining a millimeter of confidence. "Strict adherence to visual profiling and priority lane integrity. I was just doing my job." Peter laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dry, sharp, and terrifying. "Come here, Julian." Julian hesitated. I said, "Come here." Julian walked out from behind the safety of the podium. He stood 5 feet from Peter, exposed to the hundreds of eyes watching them. "You think this is about protocols?" Peter asked, reaching into his pocket. Julian flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon, but Peter only pulled out a small, folded packet of peanuts he had taken from the lounge earlier. You think I grounded $1 billion fleet because you followed a rule book? I don't know, Julian whispered. I did it because you enjoyed it, Peter said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I watched you. When you denied me entry, your pulse didn't race. You weren't stressed. You were smiling. You liked making me feel small. You liked the power of looking at a man and deciding he wasn't worth your time. Peter took a step closer, invading Julian's personal space. And now, Peter said, I own the time. I own the lounge. I own the plane. And unfortunately for you, I own your employment contract. Julian let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Look, if you're going to fire me, just do it. I'll take my severance. I have 6 months of pay guaranteed in my contract. I'll go to Delta or United. I have a stellar record. Peter smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had already shut the gate to the sheep pen. Elena? Peter called out, without looking away from Julian. Elena, Peter's chief legal officer, stepped forward from the group of suits that had arrived with the former CEO. She was holding a blue folder, her expression unreadable. Right here, Mr. Sterling. Mr. Thorne is under the impression that he is being terminated, Peter said. Could you clarify his status? Elena opened the folder. The sound of the paper turning was crisp and sharp. Mr. Thorne is not being terminated, Elena said, her voice professional and cold. Termination would trigger a severance package of $140,000 and the immediate vesting of his stock options. Given the current, fragile state of the company's finances due to today's events, the board, which is now Mr. Sterling, has decided to opt for a strategic personnel reallocation. Julian blinked. Reallocation? You're transferring me. Hope flared in his eyes. A transfer. He could handle a transfer. Maybe they would send him to a smaller hub, like Boston, or maybe a desk job in Chicago. He could hide there, keep his head down, and rebuild. Yes, Peter said. We have a critical opening. A management position that requires a very specific set of skills. Someone who is detail-oriented. Someone who knows the value of luggage. Julian nodded, the color returning to his cheeks. I can do that. I ran logistics for Heathrow for 2 years. I can handle operations. Where is it? Los Angeles? Miami? Peter shook his head slowly. Not quite. He took the folder from Eleanor and handed it to Julian. We're sending you to Anchorage, Peter said. Julian froze. Alaska? Anchorage International, Peter confirmed. Specifically the baggage reclamation and lost items department. Julian stared at the paper. His eyes scanned the lines, but his brain refused to process them. Baggage claim, Julian sputtered. I'm a senior station manager. I manage people. I don't look for lost suitcases. Oh, you won't just be looking for them, Peter corrected him. You'll be the director of complex resolutions. That means you work the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It's a solo shift. When a flight lands in a blizzard and a passenger's ski equipment is missing, you're the one they talk to. When a crate of frozen fish thaws out on the tarmac and ruins someone's designer luggage, you're the one who has to clean it up and explain it to the owner. This is a joke, Julian said, dropping the folder. I won't do it. I refuse. You can refuse, Peter said, shrugging. You can quit right now. I quit, Julian yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. I quit. You can't humiliate me like this. Elena, Peter said calmly. Please read Clause 5, subsection B of Mr. Thorne's Executive Retention Agreement. Elena didn't even need to look at the paper. She knew it by heart. Clause 5 states that if the executive voluntarily terminates their employment within 3 years of a corporate restructuring, which this effectively is, They forfeit all unvested stock options, all accrued pension benefits, and are subject to a retroactive repayment of their signing bonus. Julian's mouth hung open. Repayment? You signed for a $50,000 bonus 2 years ago, Peter said. Plus, your pension is worth about $250,000. And the stock options, well, once I fix this company, those will be worth double that. Peter leaned in close, his voice hard as granite. If you walk out of this terminal today, Julian, you leave with zero. You leave with debt. And I will personally ensure that your exit interview lists gross insubordination as the reason for leaving. In the airline industry, that's a death sentence. You won't get hired to drive a baggage cart at a regional airstrip. The trap snapped shut. The silence stretched out, agonizing and long. The crowd watched as Julian Thorne, the tyrant of Terminal 4, did the math in his head. He looked at the exit, then he looked at his shoes. He was handcuffed by his own greed. He couldn't afford to leave. Anchorage, Julian whispered, his voice trembling. It's beautiful this time of year, Peter said. Though I hear it's 20 below zero tonight. You might want to buy a warmer coat. That suit isn't going to cut it. Julian looked up, tears of frustration and impotence welling in his eyes. Why are you doing this? Just fire me. Please. No, Peter said. Firing you is too easy. If I fire you, you go home and tell yourself you were a victim. You tell your friends that the woke mob came for you. You never learn. Peter pointed a finger at Julian's chest. I want you to stand behind that counter in Alaska. I want you to have a mother scream in your face because you lost her baby's formula. I want you to feel helpless. I want you to feel small. And maybe, after a year or two of looking people in the eye and apologizing, maybe you'll remember what it means to be human. Julian slumped. His posture collapsed. He looked like a marionette whose strings had been cut. He nodded, a jerky, broken motion. He picked up the blue folder from the floor. I understand, Julian mumbled. Good, Peter said. He turned away, dismissing him completely. Report to HR for your ticket. Economy class. Middle seat. As Julian shuffled away, looking at the floor, the crowd didn't jeer. They didn't laugh. They just watched. It was too brutal to be funny. It was justice, cold and absolute. Peter turned his attention to the desk. Jessica, the receptionist who had started the chain reaction, was trembling behind the monitor. She had watched Julian's destruction, and now she knew she was next. Sir, she squeaked as Peter approached. I have 3 kids. Please. Peter softened. The hard edge in his eyes evaporated. He saw the difference. Julian was malice. Jessica was fear. I know, Peter said gently. I'm not sending you to Alaska, Jessica. She let out a sob of relief, clutching her chest. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. But you can't stay in the Diamond Lounge, Peter said firmly. You've forgotten what this job is about. You got too comfortable hiding behind velvet ropes. I'll go anywhere, she said quickly. Anything. The family assistant's desk, Peter said. Gate A12. It's where the parents with screaming toddlers, the elderly who need wheelchairs, and the unaccompanied minors go. It's the hardest desk in the airport. It's loud, it's chaotic, and it's exhausting. Jessica nodded vigorously. I'll do it, I promise. Don't just do it, Peter said. Own it. Those people are stressed. They're scared. Be the person you weren't today. Be kind. I will, she whispered. Peter nodded. He looked around the gate area. The tension had broken. The monitors were flashing green. The gate agents were beginning to call zones. The machine was working again. But it felt different. The air felt lighter. He picked up his duffel bag. the same battered leather bag Julian had sneered at hours ago. He walked toward the jet bridge. "Mr. Sterling," a voice called out. It was the pilot, Captain Reynolds. She was standing at the threshold of the jet bridge, a look of profound respect on her face. Behind her, the flight crew was lined up. "We're ready for you," she said. "We've cleared the cabin. No other passengers in first class, just you." Peter paused. He looked at the luxury awaiting him. The champagne, the silence, the separation. Then he looked back at the terminal. He saw a young couple sitting near the window in the boarding area. They looked shattered. The father was trying to rock a crying baby, and the mother was asleep sitting up, her head resting on a pile of coats. They were holding economy boarding passes. Peter turned back to the captain. "Captain," Peter said, "keep seat 1A open, but I won't be sitting in it." "Sir?" the captain asked, confused. "Go get that family," Peter said, pointing to the couple. "Row 42, I think. Bring them up front. Give them the sweets. Give them the champagne, or at least some warm milk for the baby." And you, sir?" Peter smiled. He hoisted his bag onto his shoulder. "I'll take their seats," Peter said. "I think I need to be reminded of what it's like back there. It keeps you honest." He walked past the stunned crew, past the empty first-class seats that cost more than a car, and headed straight for the back of the plane. As he walked down the aisle of the economy cabin, heads turned, whispers followed him. "That's him. That's the guy." He found row 42. It was tight. The legroom was non-existent. The seat didn't recline all the way. Peter sat down. He wedged his knees against the seat in front of him. He pulled his hoodie up. He closed his eyes and smiled. It was the most comfortable seat he had ever sat in. The curtains separating the cabins were usually drawn to keep the noise of the masses out of the sanctuary of the elite. But today, as Peter Sterling stepped past the velvet divider, the curtain felt like a wall he was happy to tear down. He walked down the narrow aisle of the economy cabin. The air here was different. It was warmer, stuffier, smelling of stale coffee and humanity. Heads turned as he passed. The whispers followed him like a wake behind a boat. Is that him? The guy who bought the plane? Why is he coming back here? Peter stopped at row 42. It was the last row before the lavatories, the seats that didn't recline, right where the engine noise was loudest. Sitting there was the family he had spotted earlier. The father looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, his shirt stained with spit-up. The mother was bouncing a screaming infant on her knee, tears of exhaustion streaming down her own face. They were surrounded by diaper bags and the frantic, claustrophobic energy of parents who know their baby is disturbing everyone around them. "Excuse me," Peter said softly. The father looked up, defensive. "We're trying to get him to stop, okay? His ears are popping." "I'm not complaining," Peter said, smiling. "I'm offering a trade." He pointed toward the front of the plane. "I have a suite in row 1. It lays flat. It has noise-cancelling walls, and the flight attendants have instructions to bring you warm milk and whatever else you need." The mother stopped bouncing the baby. "What? How much?" "Free," Peter said. "I'm taking your seats." "You're joking," the father said, eyeing Peter's hoodie. "You're the guy who shut down the airport. You're a billionaire. You're going to sit here?" "I need the perspective," Peter said, hoisting his duffel bag into the overhead bin, pushing aside a crushed duty-free bag to make room. "Go, before I change my mind." The family didn't wait. They gathered their things in a flurry of disbelief and gratitude, rushing toward the front of the plane like refugees crossing a border into paradise. Peter sat down in 42C. The seat was hard. His knees pressed firmly into the plastic back of 41C. The armrest was a battleground he had already lost to the large man in 42B. He buckled the belt. It was tight. "You're crazy, you know that?" Peter turned. The man in 42B was chewing gum, looking at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Maybe," Peter said, leaning back as best he could. "I saw what you did back there," the man said, lowering his voice. "That manager, Thorne? He was a terror. Denied my brother boarding last Christmas because his carry-on was half an inch too thick. Seeing him get crushed, that was poetry." "It was business," Peter corrected, though a small smile played on his lips. "So, what now?" the neighbor asked, as the plane began its taxi, the engines roaring to life with a power Peter now owned. "You own the airline. You gonna raise prices? Cut the legroom even more?" Peter looked out the small, scratched window at the runway lights blurring past. "No," Peter said. "I'm going to fix it. But first, I have to remember what it feels like to be stuck in row 42. The plane lifted off, banking sharply over the Atlantic. For the next 7 hours, Peter didn't sleep. He didn't work, he just sat. He felt the vibration of the floor. He ate the dry chicken sandwich wrapped in foil. He waited in line for the bathroom. He experienced every inch of the discomfort his customers paid for. And with every bump of turbulence, he planned. 1 year later, Anchorage International Airport, Alaska. February 14th, 3:15 a.m. The wind at Anchorage didn't just blow, it bit. It was a physical force, a wall of ice that cut through layers of clothing as if they were paper. Julian Thorne stood on the tarmac, his breath pluming in white clouds before him. He was wearing the standard-issue, high-visibility parka, but at 20 degrees below zero, it felt like a t-shirt. His hands, encased in thick rubber gloves, were numb. "Thorne, move it!" The shout came from the warmth of the loading bay. It was his supervisor, a burly man named Rick, who had zero patience for Julian's former life as an executive. "I'm trying, Rick," Julian yelled back, his voice swallowed by the howling wind. "The zipper on this cargo container is frozen shut." "Then use your teeth," Rick laughed, taking a sip of hot coffee. "Flight 909 from Tokyo just landed. We got 300 bags coming down the chute. If that belt isn't moving in 2 minutes, I'm writing you up again." Julian gritted his teeth. He grabbed a mallet and hammered at the frozen latch. Clang, clang. His muscles ached. His back was in spasms. He hadn't seen a first-class lounge in 365 days. He lived in a studio apartment near the airfield that smelled of heating oil. He finally broke the ice seal. The container popped open. Inside lay a mountain of luggage. He grabbed the first bag, a heavy, hard-shell Samsonite. He heaved it onto the belt. Then the next. Then the next. He paused for a second to wipe the sleet from his eyelashes. He looked up. Soaring overhead, cutting through the aurora borealis, was a massive Boeing 777. The tail light illuminated the logo on the fin. It was the new Royal Horizon logo, a stylized golden wing that looked like a hand extended in greeting. Julian stared at it. He knew that plane. He knew the heating systems in the cargo hold were top tier. He knew the passengers inside were eating warm meals. He knew the station manager in Tokyo had greeted them with a smile because he had read the new corporate mandate on radical empathy. He had built a career on looking down on people. Now, literally and figuratively, he was at the bottom, looking up. "Thorne!" Rick barked. "Stop stargazing! Bags!" "Yes, sir," Julian whispered. He grabbed another bag. It was heavy. He didn't complain. He just pulled. London, UK, Sterling Vanguard headquarters. The same moment. The boardroom was silent, but it wasn't the fearful silence of the old days. It was the silence of anticipation. Peter Sterling stood at the head of the table. He looked different. Rested. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans. The numbers for Q4 came in, Peter said, projecting a graph onto the wall. The line was going up, steeply. Revenue is up 18%, the CFO said, sounding stunned. But I don't understand, Peter. We eliminated change fees. We increased the food budget for economy by 40%. We gave every employee a 15% raise. We should be bleeding money. Peter tapped the screen. Look at the retention rate, Peter said. It's at 99%. People aren't just flying with us because we're the cheapest option anymore. They're flying with us because we treat them like human beings. We stopped selling seats, and we started selling respect. He looked around the table at the board members. And one last thing, Peter said. I'm approving the transfer request for the Anchorage team. The HR director looked up. Thorne, you're bringing him back? No, Peter said. He stays in baggage. But I'm approving his request for new thermal gear and a 3% raise. Why? The director asked. After what he did? Peter smiled. Because I saw his report from last week. He found a lost teddy bear in a snowbank and drove it to the passenger's house on his own time. He's learning. Slowly. But he's learning. Peter picked up his coffee cup, a paper cup, not china. Meeting adjourned. I have a flight to catch. I hear the middle seat in row 30 is open. And there you have it, the story of how one phone call froze a fleet and how a billionaire in a hoodie taught the corporate world that arrogance is the most expensive liability of all. Peter Sterling didn't just buy an airline, he bought a lesson for everyone watching. He showed us that true leadership isn't about being served, it's about serving. And as for Julian, well, they say revenge is a dish best served cold, and in Anchorage, Alaska, it doesn't get much colder than that. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Peter was too hard on Julian, or did the punishment fit the crime? And have you ever had a nightmare airport experience where you wished you could just buy the whole plane? Tell me your story below. If you enjoyed this ride, please smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more people who love a good justice story. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to board for our next adventure. Until next time, fly safe, stay humble, and always check the name on the manifest.